from season to season and year to year. So don't sell something that is going to be 0.6, 0.7 CLA, or let's say don't sell something that's 1% CLA and you end up with something that selling that something that is 0.7 CLA. The omega-6, omega-3 ratio then is more reliable. You can really rely on what you're doing.
Where do you get that information? I mean,
This is the research that we did down in Argentina, but out of Clemson you have similar research.
They want to get it on their own meat.
no, I mean, you go to a lab or something?
Oh, yes. The people at Clemson do that for you.
Oh, okay.
Yes, as a service. And I think
Is it
there are.
expensive to have them do it?
No, I don't think so. At home, it costs about less than $100 to do it. But it takes a time. It takes a little while. They have to run a GC analysis with the gas chromatography. It takes a little while. You have to send the sample. They have to dry it and grind it and do a few things with it. Extract the fat and run that through a chromatographer. And at the end of the day, I don't know if you need to do it frequently. You might want to try it for if you are starting this. But after a while, I think you're going to be repeating the same story over and over. Here, 8:1. Look at this level of CLA here. It's pretty low, but higher than this. And we're talking of lighter cattle. Just like I said, maybe the older they get, maybe they get a little more saturated. The omega-6s tend to increase. This number is higher than that, and maybe because they're lighter. Here they have a heavier steer in this study, and we've seen a lower level CLA. But again, all these ratios, all these animals were supplemented here. See, they were supplemented at 1.3% of body weight. And even with that level of supplement, there was a grain supplement, the ratios were pretty low. So what am I saying here? Am I saying you go ahead and supplement? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you have a protocol that requires no supplement, just respect that and you try to finish with that. But there is nothing wrong maybe if you have a different protocol and you have to add supplements in there. You'll be within the omega-6, omega-3 ratio while the pastures are good quality. And in all these cases, the grasses, the legume pastures or the legume-based pastures are actually the most predictable ones regarding the omega-6, omega-3 ratio and high CLA.
Why is that? Is it the energy content in the legumes is higher?
It's highly digestible and high digestibility overall. We have the buffering capacity of these legumes more than in the grasses, so the rumen pH doesn't drop. You know what the rumen pH is? The rumen pH is acidity. It's the degree of the rumen in this animal is in a constant change or shift from. And you see, everything the animal eats is trying to ensile in the rumen. It's like we're making silage. But what prevents the rumen from becoming a silage bag is the removal of all these fatty acids. The animal keeps removing the fatty acids so we don't get to the lactic acid. So the forage is digested faster than in a silage. Does it make any sense to you at all? So if we paralyze the rumen, what do we get? We get acidosis. The rumen inflates, and we get a lot of lactic acid because that rumen is paralyzed. It actually becomes a silage bag. So we want to prevent that with a constant removal of these acids that are produced in the rumen. That fermentation is generating all these acids, and these fatty acids are removed to the peripheral circulation, and the animal uses that as energy. So there's a tendency to increase the acidity in the rumen all the time. Some of these grasses, like the legumes the legumes are not really grass in a strict sense. They operate as buffers. They help to regulate that rumen pH, that acidity. So that's one of the things, in part at least, one of the things that happen in the rumen to regulate that fiber digestion, increases the fiber digestion to the maximum, and with fiber digestion we get this high CLA or increase in omega-3s. Did I make a mess here? Okay. Every time we paralyze the rumen, every time we increase the acidosis, we tend to paralyze the rumen. We slow down fiber digestion, and we hurt, we damage the degradation of fiber and the creation of all these desirable fatty acids that we want to have. And we slow down all processes that create rumenic acid, some of these metabolites that go into the CLA later on.
So if you look at the number for the grasses and then the legumes.
Yeah, we are saying here.
I'm reading that.
I'm reading that the opposite here. You are saying this, we're getting a higher omega-6 here. Yeah. Well, this is a very low number anyway, so I wouldn't really pay much attention to this here.
Okay.
If you allow me to say this. In general, we see that when we have the legumes, we'll have numbers like this. And then we throw in some starch or any source of high sugar content, we may reduce the rate of these metabolites and drop the pH. So in general, you're right, he doesn't show that here. But in general, we will see that. We increase the legume fraction, we have a little more buffering capacity and more stable digestibility. And another thing we find there is that we have a wider window of forage quality with these grass legume mixtures. I'm going to show you more data about that. But you're right, this will be the reverse of what I'm saying. Let's see if I got anything else here that... tenderness, alfalfa pasture or pasture finished animals, the supplemented ones, grain fed. Very often we say that pasture finished steers are slightly less tender because they're older or because they don't have enough fat or because the grass-fed gives you less tender animals. However, if we slaughter everything in a same age frame, similar age, and with a similar degree of fattening or finishing, we will find that tenderness is not an issue. And also I said that maybe we are already above that 3% intramuscular fat, which is fairly easy to get to. Tenderness will not be associated to fatness. And this says 4% here, intramuscular fat, 4, 3.5, 2.9. This is a little low, below 3. But look at the tenderness numbers, they're very much the same. This is just objective tenderness, okay, of course. It's not the panel or people's opinion, is share force. Again, the omega-6, omega-3 ratio here. The supplemented animals have a higher ratio, but not even close to that at all, to 14:1. And this supplement levels are pretty high. We're talking about, in this case, replacing about 1/3 of the animal diet, the animal intake, with a supplement. How much do they eat? How much would an animal eat a day?
2 to 3% body weight.
3% of the body weight on a dry matter basis, okay? If a 1,000-pound steer would eat 30 pounds of dry matter per day. Dry matter. How much is that on a weight basis, on an as-is basis? Sometimes If it's a very highly washy feed, that could be how much? 30 to 30 pounds?
Depending on how much moisture is in the forage.
You need to know the moisture. Sometimes if it was a 10% dry matter feed forage, how many pounds that animal would need to eat to satisfy that, to reach that 3% level? 300 pounds. Is that possible? No. He could get to 200. Yeah, he could. That steer could get it to 200 pounds. That's a lot of forage to go through. A lot of pooping. And that's one of the reasons the summer, the falls, or this wet, low temperature, washy feed times of the year, the animals cannot really gain well because they have a problem. We have a limitation with intake. They have the washy feed, it's 10%, 15% dry matter, 85% water. So to collect that amount of dry matter, he has to put through the rumen so many pounds of forage that the day is too short. We need a 48-hour day instead of a 24-hour one to harvest all that. And then when we equate that to intake on a dry matter basis, that animal may be eating 2% of body weight instead of 3. And that's enough for maintenance and maybe a pound a day of gain, but may not be enough for 2 pounds a day of actual gain. Yes, sir.
What is typically the moisture content of alfalfa?
18, 22%, 25, depending on the time when you're grazing it. We find, I'm going to go back to that tomorrow, but we find that sometimes with our first grazing in fall of these winter annuals, like cereal rye or cereal oats, triticale, when it's short and we rush to graze because it's getting ahead of us and we want to have that first pass, sometimes they have 11, 12% dry matter. It's a lush looking, nice looking piece of grass, but it's mostly water. So when we make the figures and calculate how much the animal is eating a day, we may end up finding that it's eating 1.5% of its body weight, or 2%. And then on top of that, that's way unbalanced grass because it has a lot of nitrogen, soluble nitrogen in it, high protein. But how do we measure protein in these forages that I'm talking about here? Do you know? We say, yes, we're grazing triticale and it's 18% crude protein. Wow, it's great. How did we measure that? We went for nitrogen, total nitrogen in our analysis, okay? Total nitrogen. So it was 4% nitrogen. And that's a tremendous amount of nitrogen. And then we say 4%, 4 times 6.25, and we say, okay, it's 18 or 20% crude protein. But it's just a calculation. It's not the actual protein. It's not real, true protein. It's just nitrogen in its diverse forms in the plant going towards protein, but it's not protein yet. Or even if it is protein, it's so soluble and so degradable that when it hits the rumen, the bacteria in the rumen degrades that so fast that creates a lot of ammonia and urea. And getting rid of urea is the most expensive thing the animal has to do, energy-wise. And why does it have to make urea? Because ammonia is so toxic. You all know about ammonia toxicosis, that once the nitrogen is in the rumen and it's getting into the ammonia form, remember there is no oxygen in that rumen, so it has to be eliminated as ammonia. Ammonia is so toxic that the rumen right away produces urea. It's less toxic, but it is toxic anyway, so we eliminate that nitrogen. We don't capture that nitrogen as protein in the microbial mass. We lose a lot of that nitrogen through the urea cycle, which is energy expensive. So we're not creating energy and actual food for that animal, and we're using energy to get rid of that toxin, or that toxic nitrogen. Are you following me with this? So that creates what we call the low gain fall, the fall syndrome, low gains in fall. The unbalanced grass. We're going to go back to that here. So I'm going to keep talking about always when we work on these programs, we want to have fair gains, good gains, high gains. We need to slow the pace or the speed at the rushing into these pastures to graze them when they're too short. And more so if you're under irrigated conditions that you have the water. One more thing there, nitrogen is absorbed by these grasses in a passive way. It pumps water up and carries nitrates with it. You can't get rid of them. I mean, if it's pumping water, it's going to be bringing nitrates from the soil. It's a passive. We cannot avoid that. And the plant then has to do something with that. Many of these plants just store that nitrogen in circulation there. And so we have measured up to 25% crude protein in alfalfa fields or some of these fertilized triticale and other winter annuals. What does it do to the animal? Low gains, close to toxicity, scouring. I mean, the animals get really loose. And think about a dairy that has a dairy herd on a complete diet, well balanced, and you get that dairy cow and move that cow to this sort of a grass, this washy feed. What is going to happen to her? She dies. Because she's going to try to eat so much, and that's going to be an overload of nitrogen without an adaptation, without the liver adapted to process all that she's going to die of ammoniosis, ammonia toxicosis. So it is a balance there. We need this green, growing, nice forage, but it has to have digestible fiber in it. It has to have a moderate level of protein, not an excessive amount, and a minimum level of dry matter. If we are close to 20%, 22%, we are above the hump. The animals really handle well forages that have 20%, 22% dry matter. If they are below that, that forage is too washy. It's too much. Water, the first thing again we heard there is intake, because that excessive amount of water. The next thing we heard is the mineral balance. The animals start scouring and they lose a lot of minerals. And maybe also we have an excessive amount of nitrogen, and we may be also creating a toxicity problem there with excess ammonia. This is to, I'm sure you know all this, but no. I keep talking about this because this is critical when you have a steer or an animal like in the picture there that it's getting almost ready to harvest, and you say, now for the last push, the last 2 weeks, I'm going to put that steer on this nice green lush forage, and just blow your gains and your performance, that all your efforts from the previous months is going to go down the tubes, and then you have to wait 2 more months or 3 months to get that animal back in shape and health and condition to be an animal that would create a desirable eating experience and won't have this odd flavors in the meat.
So basically, what the stool of the animal, how do you like it to look when it comes out the back door?
Well, I have pictures there, but well, I mean, you know what it should look like.
But I mean, to the degree of what you're calling washy.
Well, yeah.
Too tight. Is that a good indication of?
If it is too tight, it's going to be an excessive amount of fiber and undigestible fiber. It has to keep its shape and form. It's like like a little pie. It's going to be on the wet side, and every now and then you have animals that are a little loose, and that's okay. The problem is when each one of them, all of them, are running, with these watery feces that they don't really make a pie anywhere.
So So that's the first indication of what you're explaining here.
Exactly,
Essentially.
yes. But once